I am back today with 9 more British women writers from the early to mid 20th century. And these are writers that I thought we could kind of discover together. I haven't read more than 3 books by any of these authors, and I do have books by all of them that I want to read, and maybe you can help me decide where to go next, or maybe I can help you decide where to go next. So let us discover more British women writers together. Hello book friends, I'm Jen and welcome back to my reading life and welcome to another video in my Women Writers series. And today we are going to be talking about 9 more British women writers who were writing from the early to mid 20th century. And these are all writers that I am really in the early stages of discovery with. And so I'm hoping that maybe we can all pool our knowledge and share with one another books that we have loved by these authors and maybe where to go next. So without further ado, let us dive right in to these 9 British women writers that we can discover together. As I said in the intro, none of these authors have I read more than 3 books by them. So I'm going to start out with the few authors that I have read 3 of their books and work my way down, though I think the majority of these I have only read 1 book by each of these authors, but I really want to read more by them, and I'm going to share what I have read by them, and then I'm going to show you what I'm thinking about reading next or what I have on my shelf to read next, and maybe you guys can help give me some ideas as to where I should start, or I should say where I should continue. First up is an author you are probably all familiar with. She has a couple of very famous books. First and foremost is her book, The Enchanted April, and I am of course talking about Elizabeth von Arnim. I adore The Enchanted April. I read it for the first time 3 or 4 years ago. I have since reread it. I think it is one of those books that just lends itself to being reread and to getting more out of it every time you read it. It is just wonderful. And I think Elizabeth von Arnim is a really wonderfully complex writer, and I think sometimes people go into this thinking it's going to be really kind of light and frothy, and while there's a little bit of that, it's got more depth and a little bit more grit to it than that. So just know that if you've never read this one before, but I think it is a fabulous read. And if you want to armchair travel, I talked about some armchair travel books in one of my prior videos, and I think this would also be great armchair traveling either in the spring or the summertime or really any time of year. I think this is a wonderful book to pick up if you want to escape to somewhere lovely. And the next book by Elizabeth von Arnim that I have read is Elizabeth and Her German Garden, which is considered semi-autobiographical, and it is about a woman in her garden. And it's again full of her just wonderful writing, and she calls her husband in this book the Man of Wrath, which just makes me laugh every time I hear it. And she is sort of escaping from her family and spending time in her garden. And this is really lovely. If you want a good introduction to Elizabeth von Arnim, this is fantastic. It's very, very slim. And I just think it's equally as wonderful as The Enchanted April, though it's very different, but I think it just shows the breadth and depth of Elizabeth von Arnim's writing, as does the 3rd book of hers that I have read, which is Father. And this book is also just incredibly different from those first 2. In this, we are following Jennifer. Love that name. And she is a spinster. She's basically run her father's household, and suddenly her father comes home one day and says he's getting remarried, and much to Jennifer's surprise and chagrin, and suddenly she thinks, I can leave. I can go lead a completely different life and separate myself from my father. And so she basically does that. She goes off and she rents this kind of dilapidated little cottage that she fixes up, and there's a little bit of darkness to this book, and At first I wasn't sure where it was going to go, but I ended up loving this so much. And it is set in summertime. So if you're looking for a summer read, it is set in August, I believe. So it's got a very summery feel to it. And it really does a great job of kind of talking about women's independence and things, especially women in the interwar years, where there were a lot of surplus women, as they called them in England, because of the war and how many men died during World War I. So it really kind of tackles a difficult and heavy subject matter, but she does it in such a wonderful way. And I loved Jennifer as a character. And yes, I absolutely recommend this one, as I recommend all three of the Elizabeth von Arnim books that I've read so far. And then the book by Elizabeth von Arnim that I have on my shelf that I really want to read next is Vera. This cover looks just kind of dark and sinister, doesn't it? This reminds me of books like Rebecca or Jane Eyre or something like that, because we have a young woman who's gotten remarried, and then the only sort of, shadow over her new marriage is the figure of her husband's first wife, who died in mysterious circumstances. So that is the Vera of the title, kind of like Rebecca is in Daphne du Maurier's story. So I'm very curious about this. If any of you have read this, let me know what you thought. I think it's going to be maybe kind of dark and, I don't know, maybe gothic-y. I don't know. So yes, very much intrigued to read this, but let me know if you've read this one. What else have you read by Elizabeth von Arnim? What else should I put on my TBR pile of possibilities to read by her? But yes, I think she is a wonderful writer, and I can't wait to discover more by her. Next up is another author that I have read 3 books by her, and she writes such different stories. All of her books feel very unique to me, at least the 3 that I've read so far. And yes, I have loved one of her books, really liked one of her books, and was a little bit on the fence about a 3rd book, and that is Rumer Godden. This is The Green Gage Summer by her, and this was the 3rd book of hers that I read, and I'd heard so many things about this book, mostly wonderful things about it. It is a coming-of-age story about a young girl and her family. They've gone to the French countryside, and on their way there, their mother starts to get very ill, and then she is taken into hospital. And so the 3 children are left to their own devices. And the oldest daughter kind of gets involved with this man who maybe doesn't have the best motives. And I found this to be really much darker than I was expecting it to be. And I don't know, it just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth a little bit. I don't know, maybe I need to read it again. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I just wasn't in the mood for it when I read it, but this was only okay for me. I guess maybe it just didn't live up to my expectations of it because I had heard so much about it. But one of her other adult novels that I have read and really did enjoy was In This House of Breed, which is about a woman who late in her life decides to kind of set her life aside and become a nun. And it's all about her sort of transition from secular life to this very, cloistered life, and what life in the convent is like, and just kind of all of the personalities in the convent. This was one of the books that I read when I went through this phase of reading about nuns and convents, which wasn't intentional, but ended up being really lovely. And I very much enjoyed this. This is such a kind of immersive, epic story of this woman's life in the convent, and just all of the things that go on when you live in such close quarters with other people. And yes, I highly recommend this one if you're looking for a place to start with Rumer Godden. It was her first adult novel that I read by her, and I very much enjoyed it. But my first introduction to Rumer Godden, I actually didn't realize that this book was by her, but it is one of my very favorite childhood books. I didn't pull it out because it is packed away right now with all of my Christmas books, but that book is The Story of Holly and Ivy. And this book is just one of those books that I feel like is imprinted on my soul. I just love it so much. It made such an impression on me as a child. And the edition, the picture that I'm showing here is the edition I had as a child. And I was able to find that exact same edition through a bookseller on Instagram. I've told this story before, but it was just such wonderful bookish generosity and serendipity, and that book came back into my life, and I read it every Christmas because it is just such an uplifting and lovely holiday story. So if you need something like that at the holidays, I definitely recommend The Story of Holly and Ivy. And this edition in particular is just lovely, and I love the red and green illustrations in it, so can't say enough good things about it. And then to read on my shelf by Rumer Godden, I actually have two books. I only pulled one off, and that is China Court. And I have heard amazing things about this. Miranda Mills has raved about this book, and so many of you have said it's wonderful, and I really, really want to read it. I also have an episode of Sparrows by her as well on my shelf, which I think is more of a children's middle grade book. And so let me know which of those I should read next, because I really want to continue on with Rumer Godden. I'm just curious what kind of an author she's going to be for me, if she's going to be kind of hit or miss, because like I said, the Green Gage Summer was kind of a miss for me, but I really do enjoy her writing style, so I'm curious to continue on, so help me decide what to try next. And then my final author, who I've read 3 books by, is one who has written a book that is a just sweeping epic story. And then she has also written some memoirs, and she has also written some romantic suspense novels, and that author is Kaye. This is her sweeping epic, The Far Pavilions, which takes place in India and is just amazing. In this, our main character, whose name is escaping me at the moment, but he is Anglo-Indian. I believe his father was English and his mother was Indian, and he is sort of caught between two worlds because he doesn't really wholly fit in either, and we follow him over the course of his entire life, and it actually goes up through, I believe it's the war for like Indian independence from British rule. And I will say it did get a little bit bogged down in some of the war scenes, which are kind of in the last third of the book, and I kind of felt like the pacing slowed a little bit, but I was still so committed and so drawn into the story that I absolutely needed to find out what was going to happen in it. And yes, it did not disappoint. It is fantastic. If you're curious or you want to read books set in India, especially during the British Raj, then this is 100% a book you should read, because it is fabulous at depicting what that life is like and just immersing you in that culture. So loved this. And then, as I said, she has also written some romantic suspense a la Mary Stuart books. And I have so far read Death in Cyprus and Death in Zanzibar. And I have the rest of those. She wrote 6 of them in total, and I have the rest of them on my shelves to read. I am planning to read Death in the Andamans, hopefully this month in June. But if not, hopefully sometime this summer. And again, I also have Death in Kenya, and then I have Death in Berlin as well. So I'm missing one. I forget which one that is, but I think these are just wonderful. If you want to head off to exotic locations, MMK herself traveled and lived all over, and so she really kind of immerses you in those places like Mary Stuart does. And yes, she's 100%. These books, these Death In books, are absolutely very much reminiscent of Mary Stuart, and I highly recommend them. Yes, can't wait to continue on with them. And then I also want to read her memoir, which I have on my shelf but did not pull out, and that is The Sun in the Morning is the first one. I believe there are, I want to say there's 2 or 3 memoirs she has that she wrote about her life. And The Sun in the Morning is about the early, like her childhood life. And she did live in India or grow up in India, I believe. I think I'm getting that correct. Anyway, yes, she is just another author that I want to read everything I can get my hands on by her because I absolutely love her. Have you read MMK? I know a lot of people are familiar with The Far Pavilions, but not everybody has read or is familiar with her romantic suspense novels or her memoirs. So I'm curious if she's an author you've read or you want to discover, and what are you planning to read next by her if you are a fan? Next up, we are moving on to an author that I have read 2 books by her so far, both of which I very much enjoyed. One is so very funny and a book I recommend all the time, and that is Clooney Brown by Marjory Sharp. I love Marjory Sharp's humor. I think Clooney Brown is so funny. She is a woman who basically doesn't pay any attention to social classes. She just does what she wants, despite the fact that she is kind of the lower class in Britain, and she takes herself to tea at the Ritz and does things like that. And her uncle, who she lives with, he's her guardian, and he decides that she needs to have a job, and he sends her off to work at this country estate in the English countryside. And you follow along with her and with the family that live there that she works for. And you don't always see Clooney. I thought it was going to be kind of from her perspective, the whole novel, but actually you get really pretty deeply involved with the family members and what's going on with them. And there is a Polish emigre who is staying with them. He's a friend of the grown son in the family, and you kind of get involved in that storyline as well. It is set right in the lead up to World War II, so obviously there are lots of political things going on, and it's just such a kind of infectious read. Like, you just get kind of caught up in Clooney Brown's spirit and her zest for life. I think they says that on the back of the yes, on the back it says, transforming those around her with her infectious zest for life. So I can't think of a better way to put it, but this is such a delightful read. And then the other book by Marjory Sharp that I have read is Four Gardens, which is very different from Clooney Brown and has a much more serious tone. And we follow this woman, our main character, whose name is Carolyn Smith. And we follow her through the 4 gardens of her life. And so you kind of see her life change and evolve based on these gardens that she doesn't always own the property that these gardens are in, but they're just gardens that have an impact in her life. And I really thought that was a lovely structure to a novel, very similar to Five Windows, though these are very different books from one another. Five Windows has a very different tone to it, and Marjory Sharp's writing is different than D.E. Stevenson, so just keep that in mind. I don't think they're read alike, even though they're structured very similarly, but I definitely think this is a really great and thought-provoking book, and I very much enjoyed it when I read it, so I recommend it if that sounds good to you. And then I have 2 books by Marjory Sharp on my to-read shelves, and the first is The Stone of Chastity, and the second is Rhododendron Pie, and I don't know which one to read next. So The Stone of Chastity is about Professor Pounce, who arrives in the idyllic village of Gillingham, along with his sister-in-law and his nephew and his assistant, in pursuit of the Stone of Chastity, a stepping stone in the local stream reputed to trip up impure women. His interest is scientific, but his researches, including putting the village women to the test and documenting the results, are taken rather more personally by some. And so I think we're just going to follow along with what happens and the village's outrage over what's happening here. And yes, so that sounds very interesting, like a really interesting premise for a book. And then for Rhododendron Pie, in this we are following Anne Leventi, the youngest of 3 children in a long line of antisocial Sussex gentry. And she doesn't quite fit the mold of her intellectual, ultra-modern siblings, and their father is scholarly and wealthy enough to focus all his attention on reading and other highbrow pursuits. Anne, on the other hand, worries about being plump, is what might be called a people person, and appreciates the simpler pleasures. And it sounds like it takes place partly in London, and then Anne returns home with an unsuitably ordinary fiancé, and this dazzling, witty battle of the brows reaches its exhilarating climax. This was apparently Marjory Sharp's first novel, and supposedly she wrote it in 1 month while she worked as a typist and shared a flat in Paddington with 2 other girls. So which one of these should I read next? Let me know in the comments if you've read either or both of these, or if you haven't, but you think one sounds really good, let me know, because I definitely want to read more Marjory Sharp, and I don't want to wait too long to do that. That's what always happens with these authors. I want to read them, but there are so many of them. Where do I go next? Who do I start with? Now we're down to the authors whom I have only read one of their books, but I want to read more by each of them. And first up is Margaret Kennedy, and the book I've read by her is The Feast. This was one of the most surprising books that I have ever read. I didn't know how much I was going to be swept away by the story in this. This takes place at a hotel in Cornwall, and when the book begins, you know that this hotel, which is set on a cliffside, has collapsed into the sea and 7 people have died. What you don't know is who has died. And then the book goes back, I believe it's about 2 weeks or 10 days earlier, and you follow all the characters as they come to the hotel to stay, and you meet them and you get to learn about them and their personalities, and some of them you love and some of them you hate, and you have no idea who is going to survive this catastrophe. And it is incredibly gripping. Margaret Kennedy did such an amazing job with writing this book. I did not want to put it down, and I think I read it in about 24 hours because it was that good. And it's not a slim book, so I can't recommend this enough. It's set in the summertime. It makes a perfect summer read if you want something really propulsive and just you keep turning the pages because you need to know what's going to happen next. This is that book. And because I loved that book so much, I have been wanting to read more by Margaret Kennedy, and I was really excited when Penguin's new Mermaid collection imprint of books has republished one of Margaret Kennedy's other novels, and that is Lucy Carmichael. And this says, Lucy Carmichael is jilted at the altar, but no matter. Her loving and kind family never liked her explorer fiance anyway. Instead of moping or falling into her supportive family's arms, however, Lucy abandons their suburban home. Heading for the country, she takes up a teaching position in the industrial town of Ravensbridge. There she finds solace in her work and her new, rather gossipy colleagues, and rediscovers her sensible young self. But if Lucy has, despite everything, kept her head, where lies her heart? This sounds, first of all, so very different from The Feast, and yet, you know I love a book about a teacher or set in a school, so this definitely sounds up my alley. Has anyone else read this? Did you love it? Is this a good place to go next? And what else by Margaret Kennedy have you read and loved? Because I really want to read as much of her books as I can get my hands on. Not all of them are easily accessible, but I was so excited to get a copy of this, and I can't wait to read it. Next up are 2 authors who I think, while they're not necessarily similar to one another, the tone of their books is a little bit darker and maybe more edgy, for lack of a better word, than some of these other authors that I have talked about so far. And first up is Muriel Spark. And the book I've read by her is probably her most famous book, which is The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. And again, another book about a school teacher. And this is about Miss Jean Brodie. And she teaches at this girls' school, and she has this group of girls that I think what do they call themselves? The Brodie set. So Miss Brodie is really trying to kind of harness their each of their unique talents, but one of them is going to betray her. So you follow along to see what the betrayal is and who betrays her and kind of the ramifications of that. So there is definitely a darker tone and feel to this book. It is not necessarily lighthearted and, just fun, and I think you have to keep that in mind. I believe that's kind of a through thread with all of Muriel Spark's books, but I very much enjoyed this. Her writing is phenomenal, and she really draws you in. It's a very slim read, and you definitely are invested in it from the get-go. So I want to read more by her. I have a few books of hers on my shelf that I want to read, but I think the one I want to read next is A Far Cry from Kensington. Thank you to my friend Jacqueline for sending me this copy. She had a duplicate of this book, and so she very kindly sent this to me. And in this one, we are going back to post-war London. There, as a fat but very much admired young war widow, Mrs. Hawkins spent her days working for a mad, near-bankrupt publisher of very good books, and her evenings dispensing advice at her small South Kensington rooming house. At work and at home, Mrs. Hopkins soon uncovered evil, shady literary doings, and a deadly enemy, anonymous letters, blackmail, and suicide. With aplomb, however, Mrs. Hawkins confidently sets to putting things to order, little imagining the mayhem which will ensue. So yes, like I said, these are not necessarily light and fluffy reads, as you can tell by the subject matter of this book. But I really do like Muriel Spark's writing, and sometimes I'm just in the mood for something that has a little more bite to it. And speaking of bite, my next author also has a bit of bite to her, and that is Elizabeth Taylor. Not the actress, but the writer. And again, she's another one. I've only read one of her books, which was Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont, which I very much enjoyed. In this, we're following Mrs. Palfrey, and she is an older protagonist. And so she has gone to live at the Claremont, which is like a hotel, and it caters to elderly people. So they can come live at the hotel and kind of have a community there. But in the meantime, Mrs. Palfrey actually befriends a young man, and he is, I believe he's like a struggling writer or something like that. Anyway, they strike up a friendship, and the story is really all about the two of them. But it does have a little bit of that edge, that bite to the story that I was talking about with Muriel Spark. And I think Elizabeth Taylor's books, they just have that element to them, something a little bit darker to them. They're not just comfort reads. There's just something a little bit more under the surface, and that thing under the surface might not be very nice sometimes. So just to keep that in mind. And then I have a couple of her books on my shelf, but I think the one that I want to read next, it sounds very interesting, and that is Angel. And this says, 15-year-old Angel knows she is different, that she is destined to become a feted author and the owner of great riches. Surely her first novel confirms this. It is a masterpiece, she thinks. After reading the novel, the publishers are certain the Lady Urania will be a success, in spite of, and perhaps because of, its overblown style. But they are curious as to who could have written such a book. So nothing can prepare them for the pale young woman who sits before them with not a seed of irony or a grain of humor in her soul. So very, very intrigued to read this. Have you read Angel by Elizabeth Taylor? What else have you read by her? Which of her books are your favorites? I would love to know where to go next. I also have, I think it's called A View from the Harbor by her on my shelf, so let me know if I should read that one as well. But yes, let me know where to go next with Elizabeth Taylor. I know there are some Elizabeth Taylor fans here in my audience, so let us chat about her in the comments, along with all these other authors. And then next up is an author who the first book I read by her is a very strange book, but I was drawn to it, and I think it makes a fantastic read in the autumn months, and that is Lolly Willows by Sylvia Townsend Warner. This is about an unmarried woman, a spinster really, who refuses to kind of conform to her family's expectations and ends up kind of going off on her own. And I'm not going to really say more than that about it. There are some sort of almost magical, mystical, witchcrafty kind of things perhaps happening in here. I don't know, it depends on your read of this, but it's very interesting. It feels very ahead of its time because it was first published in 1926. It most definitely feels ahead of 1926 writing. So if that intrigues you at all and you've never read Lolly Willows, then definitely give this a try. And again, I have a couple more books by Sylvia Townsend Warner on my TBR shelf. But the book I think I want to read next is one that has been sitting on my shelf for over 10 years. I found this on the clearance cart at Half Price Books, which is one of my favorite places to find hidden gems. And the book by her that I found was The Music at Long Verney. And this is actually a short story collection. So it has 20 stories in here. So they span from 1929 to 1977. Most of them first appeared in the New Yorker, and all of them appear here in book form for the first time. And so it sounds like we've just got kind of all kinds of things. There are stories of romantic love and the mysteries of marriage, of artists who speak the truth even as they distort reality, of gardens and houses and very fine things, and of those who fancy themselves their owner. So yes, very excited to read this. Has anyone else read this? And have you read anything else by Sylvia Townsend Warner? I also have The Corner That Held Them, I believe is the title, on my shelf to read as well. So let me know if I should get to that one sooner rather than later also. But I really kind of want to prioritize this, like I said, because it's been sitting on my shelf for so long. So this might need to go on my bedside table. And we're down to the final book. And this author, I just finished reading this book. I talked about it in my May wrap up. It was one of my 6 5-star reads that I had last month. And I'm so excited to have read this. And I can't wait to continue on with this author. And that is Monica Dickens. And I read Mariana. If you want to hear my thoughts on that, I will link my May wrap up video here for you. So you can go and check that out after you watch this video. But I have also heard that One Pair of Hands by Monica Dickens is also wonderful. And I think it's about a young girl who becomes a cook. And it's kind of about her life working as a cook in, I think like in, a wealthy English home. And she has some really interesting sounding books and titles. And yes, what else should I read by her? Because I just loved this. I thought it was so wonderfully written. And yes, Monica Dickens is the great-granddaughter of Charles Dickens. So clearly she has the writing gene. And I can't wait to get to One Pair of Hands and let me know what else I should read by Monica Dickens. And that will wrap up 9 more British women writers that we can all discover together. If you haven't discovered some of these or any of these, let us learn about them and read more by them together. But definitely tell me down in the comments below, what have you read by some of these authors that I have not read, and what should I prioritize reading? Because it's so hard to choose. It's so hard to choose what to read next, and there's so many wonderful books out there and so many British women writers I want to read more by. I just sometimes have a really hard time choosing. Sometimes there's too much of a good thing. But I'm so glad that these women writers are being rediscovered and republished and brought back to the light again. And if I can do my small part to help people find these wonderful stories, then I feel good about that. So let us chat all things British women writers down in the comments below. And if you're here but you don't have anything you'd like to add in the comments, but you'd like to let me know that you were here, let's just leave some hearts this time. So leave me some hearts down in the comments below. I love knowing that you were here, and those comments really help my channel, as do likes and also hypes on the YouTube mobile app if you don't mind hitting those buttons. And if you're new here and you haven't yet subscribed, I would love it if you would do so and join my cozy bookish community. Thank you all so much for being here, for all of your lovely comments on my recent videos, especially on my Women Writers series. I have a playlist for my prior videos, so if you want to check out some other videos where I've talked about women writers, I will link that playlist in the description box below, so you can go and watch some other videos, get some other ideas of women writers you might want to try or be reminded of or read more by. And as always, I'll be back with another video very soon. And until then, I wish you a good book and a warm cuppa. Bye. Say hi. Huh. You gonna purr? You gonna purr? Who's a love bug? Who's a love bug? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.